And we are live. Welcome, everyone. If you're out there, we've got one person out there. What are we drinking, AR?
Brother, I wish I had my Cool Whip. So Joe Byrne, who's JCM Byrne, and I had an interview on Friday where we decided we were going to do shots of Ready Whip.
Oh, nice.
Which wound up being great. But the moment the interview was over, my 11-year-old came in and just went, and it was gone. That was the end of the Ready Whip.
Oh, gosh. I will be having Joe Byrne on later this year, I think in May. He'll be on the channel later.
Well, he's incredibly boring. I wouldn't waste your time.
We have Stacy from Finland here. So, welcome to, this is our inaugural episode of Self Pub Sunday, which kind of just happened organically. I put out some feelers to some authors, and the first two happened to pick Sundays, and I'm like, well, it has to be Self Pub Sunday then.
It's Kismet.
It has a rhyme to it, and it just feels right.
That's right. I like it.
So today we're joined by AR Witham, Emmy Award-winning writer, creator of the Keymark Legends, The Legend of Blackjack, and now The Tale of the Border Knight, his new novella that just came out this month. Welcome, AR. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited for this chat.
Me too. Are we going to continue talking about your education? Because I think it's fascinating. And your family background.
No, maybe a different show. I'm not self-pub yet, so we can't.
All right. As soon as Kate goes published, she has an incredibly fascinating, not only family history, but part of her raison d'etre has been filled in by that family history and has kind of created the first part of that path, which I think is really interesting.
Thank you. So speaking of writing history, let's talk about your writing inspirations and your career. So you've got this awesome world of Keymark created now that the greater world has been able to experience, but you've also got this other side gig where you're writing for TV and film. So can you talk about maybe the difference between writing your fictional novels and novellas compared to writing for the screen?
So just as a bit of background, the first job I really had coming out of college was working for Quentin Tarantino and Lawrence Bender on Pulp Fiction. Their PA guy bailed like 2 weeks into the production, so I got to work with them. They liked me. I worked with them for like 4 movies. They liked me. They got me an agent. That agent sold the first screntplay I ever write. So for like 8 years, I was a screenwriter in West Hollywood, and that's a great way to learn writing and story and structure and how to make something that works quickly. Because you've got 120 pages, right? No more, no less. And 80% of that 120 pages are blank because you've got your dialogue is like this big on the page. And it's like a scene of dialogue that's a minute long ought to take 1 page. There's your minute. And so once you learn that brevity is the soul of wit, it makes things a lot easier. Now, I think one of the things that self-pub especially suffers from is they don't have anybody like your first book or two where nobody is over your shoulder telling you got to trim it down, you got to trim it down. And not having that, you sometimes get this big, you want it with a fatter book than necessarily what you need. And that's not always a bad thing, but if you're gonna have padding, it needs to have a purpose. Mm-hmm. And so I think that was the big thing coming out of screenwriting into long form, which is considering absolutely every single paragraph and wondering whether or not it has a purpose. And if it doesn't, you shoot your babies in the head and move on, because that's a huge part of the job is self-editing and throwing out the unnecessary so that we can keep things moving. So I've gotten fairly good at that.
especially writing for a YA audience because their attentions get so much more distracted than some adults that every single word and every single sentence has to matter for the story or else you'll lose them.
Yeah, you can't go off into a 4 page explanation of the history and the political background of what. No, 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 no. And I think a lot of times adults appreciate it too, because you've got kind of two different camps. You've got either the hardcore, I've read Malazan 6 times, fantasy people, and that's great. But even they, every once in a while, are ready for something that's a little bit easier and smoother. And I love episodic feel to things, which is kind of why those chapters are broken up with the way they are. Because in Blackjack, you have a chapter, and we take you and we get you to this point, and we go, and you can stop. That's why there's that big break after every chapter. Where it's like, okay, take a pause. Here's a big page. Let me give you a quote. Here's a little bit of art. Take a breath. Right. And if you keep on going now, cool. If you want to put this off until tomorrow, cool. But I like that episodic style where in almost every case, every chapter is going to have a full arc and then maybe a cliffhanger at the end.
Yeah. So you started writing for the screen. Is that where you wanted to start, or was that just happenstance?
No, long form was always the thing.
That's always
like when I was in middle school, high school, it's absolutely it. And then I did theater for college, and a lot of that was on stage, and a lot of it was directing. And then I wrote my own plays. And then immediately after that, it was screenplays for a long time. And then there was a brief foray into television writing, which I wasn't very good at. Because television writing is even more structured, right? You got it's 11 minutes. Okay, you got an 11-minute act, and 1, 2, and 3 need to happen. And every single especially in comedy, every single second has to be right. Otherwise, you have no audience. So walking that tightrope was a little too much for me. But the thing with, people talk about, oh, gee, I wish my book was turned into a movie, or, oh, I wish somebody would come in. And that's great. It's a wonderful thing. And it's an indication that your work is good and that there's an audience there for it. But what you don't realize is that once it becomes a production, it's no longer yours, right? I don't care whether it's a play or a television show or a movie. You've got your producer, your director, your editor, your actors, your costume designers, your set designers, everything going on. And they're all filling in their piece into making that story whole. And they can make it good or bad depending on whatever that recipe looks like. And with long form, with novels, it's all you.
Yeah.
And there's a joy to be had in that. And the joke is always, it's like Stephen King is a fantastic writer, but the first, 20 movies they made of Stephen King books were terrible.
Yeah.
And what they figured out was all you need to do is have Morgan Freeman read Stephen King's narration, and you've got a movie. So that's how you get Shawshank.
Right.
So yeah, the difference between the two is amazing, and the difference with books is control.
Yeah.
Every beat, every syllable, you get to decide.
Right. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about your inspirations for writing. Do you have any writing heroes or people that you aspire to write like?
Let's start with you real quick, if you don't mind.
Okay.
Like fantasy specific, where do you come from? Where's your base? Where's your root?
I am, compared to most other people, I'm generally new to fantasy.
Okay.
I didn't read, the Harry Potter series until I was in college, well after the movies started coming out. And I think I started when the 5th movie was released, is when I started reading the books.
Okay.
And that was really when I was in high school and middle school, I was obsessed with, Dracula was my first fictional crush. I was obsessed with Dracula,
Okay.
and Edgar Allan Poe and Emily Dickinson.
Okay. You've
I
got a
wasn't
dark
because
side.
I wasn't a goth kid.
Okay.
I was like a bright, sunny kid. I tried to be friends with everyone, but that literature I was obsessed with for years. I would like walk around reciting like Edgar Allan Poe just out loud in the hallways.
And yet you avoided goth. That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, to me, black was a depressing color, and
Okay.
back then that was, all the goth kids
Yeah,
wore, and they
absolutely.
always walked around all gloomy and I hate the world, and yeah, exactly. So I loved the goth literature, but that was it. I mean, ever since I was in middle school, I was obsessed with like um just like the 80s in general, 80s music, 80s movies. And so, I was the person that wore as many bright colors as I could. I was always smiling. I was raised with, the belief that no matter what's going on inside you or at home or in your life, you should always have a smile on your face and present yourself sunny, which may not always be the best thing in life to do, but when I was in my formative years, that was kind of how I presented myself to the world.
Was that the way that you were trained, or was that the way that you saw it as being a better way to live? Or was it both?
A little bit of both.
Okay.
That was kind of what was ingrained in my head by my parents.
Mm-hmm.
And because I was told that so much, I thought I believed that for a very long time.
Okay, you thought. See, now I got to keep going and asking questions. You thought you believed that for a very long time, and then you changed at some point?
When I went to college and I started meeting other people and learning other ways of life, um, I realized that I grew up in a very tiny country town in upstate New York, and my experiences were very limited to what was presented in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
I went to the same high school that my dad went to, and I didn't have a very good upbringing when my parents got divorced when I was in middle school.
Oh,
Um,
great time for it.
yeah, I I went through a lot of depression and um, self harm moments, and at one point I was, forced to go to the guidance counselor and talk about what was going on. And I told her what was happening at home. And she went to high school with my dad, who was the main culprit of things. And she said, well, the Jim I knew never would have done that. And at that point, until I got into grad school, in my late 20s, I didn't really tell people about what was happening with myself because the one person that I started opening myself up to um, shut me down and didn't believe me. So that's when I turned to books and writing because books had always been a big part of my life. I had always been a reader since I could read my first words. Um, but that was kind of when I went inward to myself and I wrote so many things, and like my stories in high school English class were the most depressing stories that like teachers, like there was a teacher that read when we had to create a children's book for one of our projects from start to finish. Like we had like the hard bindings, and we had to do the pictures and everything, and I interpreted children's book as for me it was more YA and not children, so it had a little bit more mature themed, and like it dealt with depression and grief and loss and all that kind of stuff, and it was very depressing, and teachers started becoming concerned about me, and that's when I had to go to the guidance counselor. And I'm like, this is a completely fictional story.
We've read what you've written and we're concerned.
Suicide until they put that idea in my head.
Uh-huh.
Um, but yeah, that's where my writing started. When I was in grad school, my writing hero was Joan Didion, who is a prolific nonfiction writer, fiction writer, film producer. She's always been one of my writing heroes.
Nice.
Yeah. What about you?
I just like to, I mean, you talk about reading being cathartic, writing is cathartic,
Absolutely.
right? There's a lot of poison that you can leak out and get rid of by
Yeah.
telling those stories. And reading them in a vicarious and experiencing them in a vicarious way is fantastic. But being able to, you know, put that out on paper and have it be your damage or a
Yeah.
version of your damage is a great way to get rid of it,
Yeah.
or at least be able to face it and punch it in the face.
Yeah. I wrote a lot of stuff in my MFA thesis that my mom was the only person in my family to read it. Um, and she's like, if you get this published someday, you might need to change some of this. And I'm like, maybe.
Maybe.
I mean, it's the truth. It's really what happened, but it went into a lot on how my dad's family treated my mom during the divorce and after the divorce.
Right.
Um,
When you publish, the names will be changed to protect the guilty.
right. And my thesis advisor at the time, who's an amazing writer on herself, Kim Barnes, she told me when I first put the idea in front of her of what I wanted to write, which took me forever to even figure out what I wanted to write. She said, during this process, you're going to need to find a counselor at the school to go and talk to you, because there will be things that you dredge up in this process that you'll need to talk to someone about. And that was the first time that I found the true gift of a counselor that really understood you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I'm really sorry that you went through all that, but at the same time, I'm also really happy, one, that you found an outlet to be able to push it out and get through it, and two, that you found counselors that can help and had people supporting you in making that happen, because 20 years before that, they probably would have dumped it under the rug.
Exactly. I looked at things like that as it was unfortunate that it happened, but I take a mentality that everything happens in your life for a reason, and everything that you go through in life makes you to who you are today.
I completely agree. You are a result of your damage, and everybody has damage. And the question is, how do you deal with it and face it and adjust it? Because any one of us can just go, oh, it's too much, and hide under the pillow.
Right.
But that's not what most of us do. Most of us go, okay, I'm hurt, keep on going, or I'm hurt and I'm going to fight back, or I'm hurt and I'm going to lash out at somebody else, very negative.
Yeah.
Or I'm hurt, but I'm going to put that somewhere where I can deal with it and do kind of what your initial reaction to the world was, which was, it doesn't matter how I'm feeling on the inside, I'm not going to spread it.
Right.
And I think that's a huge thing for people to learn as you get older. And I mean, out of childhood, is, wearing your emotions on your sleeve all the time is not only not all that good for you, but it's pretty lousy for the people around you.
Right.
And OBT dubs, you depend on the people around you to be the balloons that kind of pick you up and hold you up a lot. That's a big reason why you have friends. And if you're always the one going, then it's really tricky to have people in your life who are not also like that.
Yeah, it took me a long time to be able to find the right set of friends. I hadn't really found that set of friends until I discovered the BookTube world a couple years ago. I always had, the people that I would say friends in quotes, who on the good days they're there for you, but when you truly needed them, you were on your own.
Yeah.
But let's move on to maybe a happier subject. And
I can actually answer your question if you want.
Oh yes.
And I got props. This is the base. That is the foundation right there.
Excellent. Yeah.
That's me when I was in first grade. This is me in second grade. This is me in third grade. This is me in fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh. I quit that book about 6 times. Seventh, eighth grade. And to me, The Hobbit is the root. And what's magical about The Hobbit is, as so many people have experienced, whatever it is about that story that makes it timeless. The fact that he doesn't want an adventure, the fact that he's kind of like all of us and he likes his little comfortable life, but there's that secret pull coming, and then once you're in, and the sense of humor that's built into The Hobbit that is not necessarily built into the rest of the Lord of the Rings, I think is the thing that to me makes it my favorite book of the bunch. Because there are light moments where you're talking about, the origin of golf, being a dwarf knocking off a goblin's head and it rolling into a rabbit hole, and that's how they came up with the idea for a game. It's little stupid things like that. I just love that little, like that seasoning, right? Thank you, Andrew. That's exactly right. And no, you can't have an Emmy. And then for me, then you go here and you go to all the Terry Brooks stuff. Right, because when I was a kid, it was either Terry Brooks or Lord Fowl's Bane, and that's a terrible, 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 terrible book if you're a child or if you're an adult. And then a lot of Blackjack came from that, and the reason Blackjack has the illustrations is because of this. I mean, the N.C. Waith stuff is just gorgeous and phenomenal, and really helps you as a reader kind of add to your imagination. I hate it when art takes you out of your imagination. It's completely the wrong thing. So that's a danger. Yeah, talk about damage, Joe. I feel bad for Stephen R. Donaldson. I don't know what his life was like, but it can't possibly have been good. So that's all the fantasy stuff going through, and then for me, Vonnegut was always a big thing, because Vonnegut takes risks constantly.
Absolutely.
The entire book is a risk.
Yeah.
And this is a work of art. Look how big it is. Right? I always come back to Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. 33,000 words. Literature classic. It doesn't need to be El Chonko to have something that works.
Yeah.
And I love that. And in fantasy, we kind of get into that sometimes. It's like some of us judge a book by, the bigger it is, the better it is. So some people are just going to feel like Priory of the Orange Tree is the book for me because it's gigantic. And yes, that's what I want. But that's not necessarily me. And then I feel like I got to go with my Gaiman, right? And this was a big thing in college for me, because it was, that goth experience that you were talking about, where you're exploring that dark side. This gave me an opportunity to explore a dark side without having it get too dark. To me, the introduction of death as a character in these books is one of the most perfect things in the entire series, because death is light.
Yeah.
Right? She's very up. And that going against type in the writing worked so well. And then
meanwhile, for me, death was Emily Dickinson's death, where he's driving a carriage.
And then reading non-fantasy is really important. And in addition, I didn't want to just do fiction, but I think nonfiction as well is really important. Eric Larson, there are some phenomenal nonfiction writers. And I don't care whether you want to talk about a palate cleanse or whatever it is, but for me, I can't read fantasy all the time. I can't read sci-fi all the time. I need something different,
Yeah.
right? I need to, if I keep going down that path all the time, I'm going to get tired.
Yeah.
So being able to read stuff that is outside of that vein, that's well written, there's tons of it, is fantastically helpful. And then getting outside of the standard by getting into books from different cultures that
Yeah.
some people have never heard of, that still winds up being one of the most popular books in the entire world.
Yeah.
If you haven't dug into The Story of the Stone, also known as The Dream of the Red Chamber, take a look. And then the other thing too is the writing books, right? Being sure that you're working on your craft at the same time as you're working, because you got to feed the meter in terms of inspiration, because that's what the other stories are for. Not only for me to enjoy, but for also me to go, oh, I like the way he did this. Oh, I didn't like the way that she did this, but I thought that the exploration was really neat. And so that's really where the ideas come from. And so being able to take those ideas and put them into some kind of structure,
Yeah,
is really important. So anyway, those are my props.
That's great. Seeing all of those, I've only read a handful of those, but I can definitely see the influences especially in The Legend of Blackjack. So I will say at this point, we're going to slide into spoilers for The Legend of Blackjack. So,
real quick in the comments, I need to address Bo. Andrew wants one of the Emmys. And Bo says that it's rude. Emmys are meant to be shared. Now, the difference is that I trust Bo. So I'll send Bo one.
But not Andrew. Bo and Andrew can share their Emmy.
Bo can send Andrew a picture.
Hello, Wendy.
Now, do you want to do spoiler? Hey, Wendy, do you want to do spoilers? Do you want to do non-spoilers?
Let's talk non-spoiler Blackjack first, and then we'll go into spoilers.
Okay. If we're going to do non-spoiler, never mind. I'm sorry. I always go into the interviewer role, so I apologize. It's your interview. I'll cede to what you want to do.
Conversation. So,
Conversation.
Bo agrees. So, talking about Blackjack, you talked a little bit about your inspiration for writing and your stories. Where did the idea of Blackjack come from?
So way back when, in the early days, when the earth was cooling, and I'm talking, I was 14. Like, the idea for Blackjack came when I was the same age he was. And that, at that time, there was no such thing as an origin story, right? You had your heroes and your superheroes and your fantasy people, and they didn't really start from ground zero. I think it was like Wizard's first rule, or it was Eddings.
Yeah.
I think kind of took a kid from the ground up. And I really like those stories where it's like Chronicles of Prydain, right? Where you start from zero. And so I wanted to take a character and start from zero. And I wanted to do it with a kid that was like the people that I knew, which was smarter than the average bear, but also, deficient in a lot of ways, and not popular and not outgoing, and a little bit of I don't want to use the word victim, but a result of their own damage. And so I love the idea of starting off with a kid that I can relate to, which is why you get, kid in Chicago as your starting place, because I feel like that's really easy to relate to. You give him a little bit of empathy and sympathy and background and history, so you can relate to the guy in the first 2 chapters, and then off we go. And being taken on a magical journey, I think, is fantastic. And, the whole idea of Blackjack is you start here at ground level, and you just keep getting punched in the face and punched in the face and punched in the face until you wind up getting stronger and stronger and stronger and stronger. And it's not you, right? It's the people around you that take you to there.
Right.
And that to me, that's what life is. So being able to talk about the people that feed into your life, that build you up and make you better, give you confidence, correct you when you're wrong, I think is really important. So that's where the idea of it came from. I just wanted to build a hero from the ground up.
Yeah. So you started with the idea of Blackjack the character,
Yeah,
Black the character,
yeah.
and then the story kind of
The legend is the
right.
thing that came first. I wanted this kind of outlaw rogue, Robin Hood, steal from the rich, give to the poor. And then I was like, I started writing that and I was like, this is boring. I was like, well, what if you do the story of how somebody becomes that or something like that?
Right.
And so that, that's how it was like the legend came first. And then it's like, this is the person that you're supposed to be. That's impossible.
Yeah.
So what are you supposed to do? And
I love that you put him in the world of Keymark and he was completely clueless. Like, my favorite kind of stories are the stories where the reader learns along with the main character as they're learning the world and everything that's happening around them, instead of just, these information dumps where the character already knows what's going on, but the author has to tell the reader.
And it's tough. I mean, I don't want to poo-poo information dumps, but they can get really, I even feel like Valerian's introduction to Keymark is 4 pages and I still feel like it's too long. And I was like, the best I can do is turn this into a once upon a time story,
right,
and deliver it that way. But I think as a writer, sometimes you get lucky or you make some choices that allow you to evade doing an info dump.
Mhm.
And I feel like some writers are just kind of backed into a corner where it's like, well, I got to explain why this nation is at war with this nation.
Right.
I mean, you look at the original Princess Bride by S. Morgenstern.
Oh yeah.
Right? That book is awful. Because it's all political, and it's all Gilder and these 2 countries are at war. I mean, there's one section where he's got like 20 pages of what she's packing in her suitcase, right? And that was the joke, is that when Grandpa showed up to actually read him the story, Grandpa got rid of, I think it was his uncle actually, just got rid of all the boring parts and skipped them. And that's how you wind up with the Princess Bride that we all know. So yeah, I one of the problems inherent in fantasy is everybody says they're longer because they take time to introduce the world from the ground up. And I understand that. And at the same time, I have very little. All right, here's what makes me mad is when I open a book and I start reading and I get in the first 2 pages 20 proper nouns that I've never seen in my life.
Yeah.
And it's too much. Yeah. It's too much for me. Give me something to hook into. Give me a character who's either doing a thing or experiencing a thing, and then let that stuff come in later.
Yeah, absolutely.
But what do I know?
Okay, let's now dip into some spoilers, talking about Blackjack and the Legend of Blackjack.
Okay.
So,
if you haven't read the Legend of Blackjack, no watching past this point.
Right. Or if you don't care about spoilers like me, then continue watching and thanks for joining. But if you haven't read it yet, shame on you.
That's right.
Go read it. It'll take you like a day to read, and then come back and watch this. And then go and read The Tale of the Border Knight, and then come back. Oh. Because that'll take you like 2 hours maybe to read.
Yeah, that should take 2 hours. The audiobook is, I think, like 93 minutes. And I really enjoy doing the audiobooks. I think it worked way better than I ever thought it was going to. So I'm very happy about that. But
so tell us about that experience.
I really like doing the audiobook.
Narrating your own audiobooks.
So I did an audiobook because you have to, right? You need to have an ebook, you need to have a paperback, and you need to have an audiobook. Those are the 3 main ways that people consume their stuff. I didn't want to hire an audiobook because it's $4,000. Right? Getting a pro to do your audiobook is a considerable investment. And I didn't think this was a labor of love. This was not a commercial endeavor. And so I just did it. And I went down to the local car dealership every Tuesday for 9 months and just read the book and cut it together and put it up on Audible. And for whatever reason, it worked.
It was
Um,
fantastic.
but yeah, the experience was great. And then Tale of the Border Night I did right here. Is it Tale of the Border Night now? It used to be called Noble Suburb. But yeah, Tale of the Border Night I did right here.
Well, I absolutely loved listening to The Legend of Blackjack on audiobook.
Oh, good.
I felt like there are some books that don't work well on audiobook,
Sure.
and some books the audiobook enhances the reading experience. And I felt like, at least for me, I was told by Lena at Lauren Lullabies, who recommended Blackjack.
Yeah, that's right.
As my patron pick in
She had you
December.
read it. She was like, "This is your
Right.
book of the month."
Right. Every month I spin a wheel with all my patrons' names on it, and whoever's name it lands on, they get to pick what book I read the next month. I tell them any book, any genre, any size, no matter the reason you want me to read it, whatever, any book I'll read that next month. And she picked A Legend of Blackjack, and a couple months before that, you had approached me with the Audible credits for the audiobook for Blackjack.
Yeah.
And then I had seen that Leslie at the Nerdy Narrative had just read Blackjack and absolutely loved it. And I'm like, it's fate that I have to read this book right now. So Lena was like, you have to, I was like, I have the audiobook credits for this, so it's perfect. She's like, yes, but you need to at least get the Kindle copy or the paperback copy so you have the illustrations there, because it's not the same without it. So I did an immersion read of Blackjack where I had you reading the story to me while I was reading along on the page, and it made it feel like a truly magical experience. My favorite kinds of audiobooks are where the author narrates it themselves, because they know the story, all the way the characters' names are supposed to be pronounced, and the way they imagined the stories and where emphasis need to go and not. And some people, have certain narrators that they prefer in audiobooks. I love it when an author narrates their own works, because it's their love, it's their labor of love, like you said.
Yeah.
And so listening to the audiobook just really brought it to life for me. So Wendy will say, proceed at your own caution, because we will be talking about spoilers. But if you don't mind spoilers, then feel free to continue.
Well, I will say one of the things about this is, in your experience with the audiobook, is this is really supposed to come off as a story. So I think it really helps the audiobook because it's me telling you a story, which is what the book is. I'm as close to you as I can possibly be during the narration of the story. Yeah. Right. And so I think that the subject and the manner of the story in the book really feeds into that. Here, sit down by the campfire and let me talk to you.
That's exactly what it felt like, a campfire story, a bedtime story that, you get a little bit every night before you go to bed, or every time you sit in front of the campfire, and then it just builds into the Legend of Blackjack.
Right. When you start off, you're like, what is this? Right. How is this any legend? Okay,
I love going into books as blind as I can without knowing knowing as little as much about the book as I can. And so I'm like, I know that Lena loves this, and I know Leslie loves it, and we both have very similar reading tastes. So I know I'm going to love this book. But it wasn't until I had finished the last page that I was like, I didn't know I was going to love it as much as I did. And now I'm one of those people that doesn't stop talking about it. People are probably sick of, they're like, oh no, this book again.
Sick of hearing about it.
Oh my God.
Well, and to me, it's like, if I can get you to hear, right? If I can get you to chapter 4 and the whole kind of pivot of where Act 1 centers around,
right?
I should have you.
Yes.
and then 5, take a breath, 6, everything goes wrong, and usually 7 is where people are like, what is he doing? Because then we do the introduction of Rooker and the Venture Brigand, and it's like, whoa, 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 whoa. And if you can trust me past 7 into 8, 8 is where it starts coming together.
Right.
And if you can trust me that long, then you're fine for the rest of the thing.
I mean, I'll say you had me entranced from page 1. I was like, it's not often that I'm sold on the first page of a book. I usually give a book about 100 pages until I'm like, okay, I can do this. I don't often DNF a book, but I often question where a book is going to go. But I like page 1, I'm like, okay, I am ready for whatever this ride is going to take me on. I trust this guy to take me to where we need to go at the times that we need to go, and this is going to be a fun read.
Yeah, and as a storyteller, you need that trust through Act 1, because you're not going to come with me on the rest of it unless you're like, okay, I like your character, I like your storytelling enough to find out if you're going somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because that's the problem with new authors, especially indie authors. You don't know. Like, do I trust you or not?
Yeah.
And that's where reviewers come into play. I mean, you have no idea how important you are, because we're in the community, right? We have 946 books a week that are recommended to us. And it's the ones that keep getting brought up by reviewers that you trust, that work their way to the top of your TBR.
Yeah.
And like, okay, this is the one I'm willing to spend time with next. And so, you cannot understate the importance of reviewers.
So, speaking of your characters and liking your characters, my favorite character in Blackjack was Memphis. But I'm wondering, who is your favorite and least favorite or hardest character to write along the journey?
Oh my gosh, that's mean. I mean, there are 9 big ones, and all of them have their place in the fellowship. And
every parent has a favorite child, though, whether they admit it or not.
Oh man.
Or who is the easiest character to write? Frame it that way.
Who's the which character to write?
Who's the easiest? Who is the easiest?
Easiest is Jack.
Jack.
Easiest is Jack. That's just mirroring. Right. And Jack's easy because you can go inside his head.
Yeah.
Right. And whatever he's feeling and going through, you can talk about that. Whereas everybody else is kind of, at an external point. We go into Memphis's head at one point, and we go into Campion's head at one point. But it's love of the day. Like some days it's chance, right? I'll do chance, and it's just like, because it's fun, right? It's just easy to write, and you just kind of throw it around, and you don't care about anything, and it's great. And other days it's Rooker, where it's just like, screw all this, I don't care about any of it, And some days it's Memphis, because Memphis is great because there's this inherent power in Memphis, where he's not really worried about himself ever. And he's only concerned about you. And, I hate to use the word motherly in relation to Memphis, but there's something about that. I mean, at bare minimum, fun uncle. Right. Because really that's his concern, is you. And then with Valerian, it's like, I love writing Valerian because it's the guy you wish you could be. Right. I wish I was that good. I wish I was that filled with purpose. I wish I every moment is in faithful service to you.
Yeah.
And I think it's great. So I could keep going on. I hate to not answer the question, but
no, you don't have to answer it. I totally understand it. And I think with what you said about Memphis, I think that's why I was drawn to him more. I loved all of the characters, but I think that's why I was drawn to him more, because me as a person, I'm always that person that's worried about everyone else over themselves.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I don't have kids of my own, but I've always had that like motherly, attitude. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I want to make sure everyone else is taken care of first.
Right.
And then if there's time, I'll take care of myself.
Right.
Which uh, in life is maybe not always the smartest mentality to have, because you have to have self-care and you have to take care of yourself too.
Well, there's a reason the airlines tell you to put on your own oxygen mask first, and then take.
So, did you have a favorite scene to write?
Oh man. Like, you talk about Django a little bit, and the idea of what he is and what he wants to be, and the fact that honor is the thing that matters. And there's a hard piece where he's trying to figure out how to keep honor as being the thing that he's doing, and they all question him, at one point. And coming out of that, like, the whole pinnacle of the story to me is the coming of age piece where Jack makes the decision that he's in. And the result of that is Nepenthe.
Yeah.
And that scene in the cave with the wolf is the crux of the whole thing to me. It's like, here is all of your doubt and all of your fear, and it's going to eat you now.
Yeah.
What are you going to do? And I love that. And then for Jack and Django, everything changes after that, because now it starts becoming true.
Yeah.
Everything that was a lie leading up to that point starts to become true. And so to me, the scene with the wolf is the absolute pivot point for the whole story. It's so fun to write. When you talk about addressing your darkness and your fear and all that, when you get to play that character and be the wolf and say, come here, you want to give up, you want to quit, you're not good enough.
Yeah.
And all those doubts and fears coming at you, and then being able to overcome it. It's
Right.
like, oh yeah.
I think my favorite scene was the scene where Jack learns how to shave.
Yeah.
That one was just so poignant, because Jack loved his dad, but his dad was taken from him too early. And he never got that moment with his dad.
Yeah.
And then, at the end, we circle around and he gets his dad back. But by that point, Jack has become someone different.
Yeah.
He's not the same Jack that we had when we first started the adventure with.
Yeah.
And so that moment, I was reading that while I was at work, sitting at my desk, and I just had tears, sobbing. And I'm messaging Leslie, and I'm like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. She's like, I know exactly where you're at.
I'm glad that played, because that's one of those scenes where you really have to trust your audience.
Yeah.
Because everything's in the subtext. I'm not saying any of it, and it's just a scene about a guy learning how to shave. And for readers to go, oh my God, I get what you're doing there, and be emotionally invested in that moment. Winner, chicken dinner.
Yeah, absolutely. So shall we move on to your new novella?
Sure.
Tale of the Border Knights. So, Wendy, I'll say, you said you're reading Blackjack next month. You should also add in Tale of the Border Knights when you finish Blackjack, because it's like 70 some pages. It's a true novella, which I was so glad to see, because a lot of times, especially in fantasy, like, people like Brandon Sanderson will write these quote novellas, but then they're the same size as like a regular novel. And so when I got the Tale of the Border Knights, I'm like, oh, this is a real novella not just a short novel.
Well, and I was really worried that it was too short, right? Because it was written, I mean, it's like the audiobook. It was written because you need to have something to give your audience to say thank you.
Right.
And so you put something on your site that's a story, and that's what it was. And what was great was I got to give it to the, you know, very, very few people that sign up on the website to be part of the newsletter. But I asked them, I said, you know, what works and what doesn't? And a lot of them got back and said, I really like this and I didn't like this. And their input was the stuff that allowed it to evolve into being a better story than what it originally was. And I mean, Tale of the Border Knight is just like a thank you letter to everybody who read Legend of Blackjack. And it's just like, here's a little bit of history. And what I liked about doing what I liked about doing that story was, you know, Stall Sheehan. One is a terrible name, but you know, this is a guy you did not meet during the book, right?
Right.
You're aware that he's existed, but the first moment, we've already done spoilers, so the first moment you run into him, he's already dead.
Yeah.
And being able to go, okay, well, who was this guy? And then, you know, the whole idea of armor and what that is and what that represents and what that would mean to somebody. And I didn't want to do, you know, a character who started off weak and became strong. That didn't fit for any of the Border Knights.
Right.
But being able to address that need for protection always. Like Stahl is obsessed with armor.
With the shoes inside the boots. Always ready to run.
Like one, and you know, one of the last lines that went in was, "We should have feet are terrible. You know, the worst design on the human body. We should have hooves or paws or something." It was like, that's who he is. That's it. Perfect.
Yes.
He's like, he's a guy who considers himself too weak for himself. Animals are better than me.
He was a great addition to the story. So we got a couple of the knights in Blackjack.
Yeah.
We had Valerian, we had Campion. Was there one particular knight that came first to you?
For that story in particular?
Mm-hmm.
The first part was I want to do the origin of the Border Knights. And then I was like, well, okay, I'd do it through the Valerian's POV.
Right.
And then I started thinking about what that story would mean. And I think 70 pages of being noble and doing the right thing would get really boring. Obviously couldn't do Campion. And then it was like, well, Bantam was an option, but there are other things that go along with Bantam later in Blackjack that I would like to explore later.
Okay.
And so then it was, you know, you go through the rest of them. I never introduced the Jade Knight at all, and I want to keep it that way later. Again, more things later. So it kind of became this whittling down process of who it wasn't. And then it was like, well, what if I do Stall? Because Farrier Han, you met. You know, he's growing his little flowers in the tower, and he goes up and he gets killed. But you got a moment with him, and you never got a moment with Stall. And I thought, okay, here's a guy that I can do whatever I want, right? Because you don't know anything about him, so I can start from zero. So that gave me so that was how I got to, okay, we're going to use Stall, and then it became, well, what's the story you're going to tell? And to me, everything is always about character. So then it became, you know, armor. What do we do with armor? Okay, here's his damage.
Yeah. I loved the idea of the armor and the different knights, not only having different color armor, but their armor fit their fighting styles and their physiques and their personalities. And it was kind of like, you know, for a knight, the armor is what we wear every day on our clothes.
Right.
It's how we express our personalities. But for a lot of knights, you know, they serve under different royalties or leaders or causes, and they don't have control over what their armor looks like. It's a uniform. Whatever the colors are, the banners are, you know. It's a uniform. But with the Border Knights, it fits so well to each one of the characters that as we're being introduced to the pieces of armor, you're like, oh yeah, that is perfect for that guy. That's perfect for that guy. We know what's going to come with this guy.
Right.
We knew what Valerian's armor was going to look like because we already knew what Valerian was going to be like. As soon as you introduce the idea of individualized pieces for each of the knights, we, at least for me, I can't speak for everyone, obviously, but for me, my brain was already imagining what each one of the pieces were going to look like as we went down the line.
Yep.
And I just loved that. And the thing that I loved the most about both Blackjack and the Tale of the Border Knight was that they're new stories that we've just gotten. We've got Blackjack last year, we got Tale of Border Knight this month, but while I was reading them, they felt like the nostalgia that you get from reading a childhood favorite as an adult.
Can you help me with that? Because Andrew has said that on multiple occasions. The nostalgia aspect scares the hell out of me, right? Because if that's all I'm doing is hearkening back, I feel like, ooh, I don't know if I'm doing anybody any service. So what is it about the stories that makes you feel nostalgia? Help me out here.
Well, for me, it was the youthfulness of the characters and the story itself. It felt it in my reviews, I say it had everything that a legendary adventure story would have. I grew up on books
Okay.
like Kidnapped and Thousand Leagues Under the Sea, Jules Verne, and exactly. I mean, I have my grandfather's copy that he read when he was growing up. I grew up with all of those stories, and so it made me remember the stories that I used to love being told as a kid, but in a new light with a modern twist. I
Okay.
know, like Leslie described it as kind of the modern version of the Neverending Story.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't grow up reading that book. I didn't see the movie until I was much older in life. But for
Yeah, I
me,
didn't see it until college.
right, for me, it was more the Kidnapped and you know the Jules Verne stories, 80 Days Around the World, and um, all of those kinds of stories. I'm blanking on another major one that I can't think of right now.
Chronicles of Narnia type stuff.
Yeah, even Chronicles of Narnia, though, I mean, you'll see how late I was to fantasy. I've read a couple of the Chronicles of Narnia books,
That's okay.
but I didn't read the entire series until last year.
Okay.
I think I read like Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe a couple times, and maybe the Magician's
Magician's Nephew.
Nephew, like once. But beyond that, like I hadn't read any of the other books.
Well, and the thing about Chronicles of Narnia is, in my opinion, there are maybe 3 or 4 of them that are good, and then the rest of them are like, that's okay.
Right.
Right. It's like Chronicles of Prydain. It's like there are a couple that are good and there are a couple that aren't.
Yeah.
And you're not missing a ton by not having read all 7 of them.
Right.
But also, it's not exactly a huge effort, to read all those books, and you get something out of all of them.
Yeah. So, another thing that helped kind of with the nostalgic feel, a lot of times the word nostalgia gets a negative connotation to people, right? To me, it's a great thing to be able to be reminded, especially, earlier we talked about my not so great upbringing. But to have things that remind me of the good times, I'm always looking forward to, because my brain immediately, when I think of my childhood, the first thing that comes to my mind are the bad parts of it. the not great parts. And so to have something today that at the age of 37 will remind me of those good times is something really special, because between the heaviness of the bad times that I had, and then when I was in grad school I suffered from repeated seizures, and because of that my memory is complete crap.
Oh,
And so I have a hard enough time on my own just remembering that I did have good times as a kid.
hmm.
My childhood wasn't as bad compared to some other people's. There were still some good times. There were still people that loved me and supported me. My grandparents were like my parents for a long time.
Yeah.
And my grandpa was my best friend
Yeah.
until the day he died. I spent my
Bless him.
entire junior year of high school taking care of him while he was fighting cancer.
Right.
I became his stay-at-home nurse when he came home from hospice. And I would sit there and read him stories, like that reminded him of his childhood.
Hmm.
And so to be able to have a book that came out this year, last year, in this, time that reminds me of those stories, to me is a great thing. Um, and there's a line in the introduction of The Tale of the Border Knights that was like a really good wallop to the heart. And I feel like, at least to me, it kind of encapsulates the Keymark world and the Border Knights and Blackjack. And that was many have called them Border Knights, though few realize how many borders they defended. And even though, in that line and in that story, we're talking about the Border Knights, to me, it expands to the legend of Blackjack and how, Jack was thrown into the Keymark world not knowing anything about it, but then he became kind of their champion in a way, and their knight of their day. They had the Border Knights, but within Blackjack, we see kind of some of the Border Knights being dismantled and, going away, and some of them, not as what we originally thought they were, and kind of Blackjack became their knight of their day.
The Black Knight. Oh, and one of the things about that you talk about the tale of the Border Knight. See how many references you can see that are made to Campion's right hand. I think there are like 7 references to Campion's right hand.
The left hand.
Okay, well then let me ask you a follow-up on the nostalgia question.
Sure.
Do you feel like that's something that's hard to find in contemporary fantasy?
Absolutely. It's, for me, it is. Other people who grew up with fantasy, I think it's easier to find that nostalgia because they've grown up with it.
Okay.
And so they have the nostalgia already in their background. For me, I mean, talk about original fantasy. I didn't watch the full Lord of the Rings movie series until I was in grad school. At that point, I was already in my 30s. I had seen like The Hobbit and maybe one of the first movie, but I hadn't watched all of the movies until I was in grad school. And we did like a full-on marathon of the director's uncut version with
5.5 hours every movie.
I mean, this was, in grad school, so we had all of the alcohol to get us through, and everyone brought snacks, and we just had like a full spread of like all these. And it was in the winter in Idaho, so there was nothing else to do. Northern Idaho too, right? Like next to Washington, where if you walked outside, you'd get blown away and frozen to death at the same time.
Which is awesome. It's get thrown against a tree and shattered.
Right. If you go there in like the summertime or like late spring, it's absolutely beautiful. My niece saw when she was younger. She's now 12, but when I was out there, she was just a toddler, and I sent my stepdad pictures of the rolling Palouse Hills that go between northern Idaho and that little skinny part in Washington. And my niece saw one of the pictures and thought it was a screenshot from the Wizard of Oz and the poppy fields.
Yeah.
So yeah, for me, finding that nostalgia, going back to your question, is really hard because I don't have that background per se that other people have in fantasy.
Right.
And so, people grew up reading The Sword of Truth and Lord of the Rings and Terry Brooks and, all of that. And I didn't even read Harry Potter until I was in college.
Right.
And so, I read things like I grew up listening to The Wind in the Willows by Kenneth Grahame. My mom read me that story a gazillion times. I grew up, wanting my own pet monkey because of Curious George.
You're not wrong.
That was how I learned how to read and write. Before I went to kindergarten, I had the books, and I remember sitting there with, the good old tracing paper and tracing over the pages, just over and over, days and days and days, until I started learning that each of these funny symbols were letters, and each of those letters made up words, and the words made up the stories. And then that just set my imagination on fire. Kids have their own, imaginary friends growing up. I had an imaginary monkey named George that went to kindergarten with me. And then, we would play tricks on the other kids when they didn't want to be my friends. So it's things like that. And kind of that playfulness that when I was reading Blackjack and, seeing Memphis come alive on the page, harken back to those playful moments of, you have this monkey that causes all this trouble, but he never actually gets into trouble for it. Right. And so it was things like that in your books that reminded me of things that I loved and things that brought happiness to my childhood.
Nice. That makes me feel a lot better.
It's nostalgia in the best possible way.
Well, and the other thing too is that, like, with this, people talk about the positive emotions that they got out of it, and that gives me a huge sense of gratitude. But at the same time, I like to think that there are enough dark moments in here that are there, one, because they need to be, but two, because without that juxtaposition of, like, if anybody walks into this thinking it's just going to be a little romp, you're probably not going to be satisfied.
It's a good time, but there's also those times, it's like a true adventure story. You have the adventure, you have the humor, you have the fun times, but there's also those moments where you're wondering how this hero is going to make it out of this story alive. Yeah. You're wondering how they're going to pull this off, if they're even going to be able to pull it off. And, I'm a big crier. I cry in everything, happy tears, sad tears, frustrated tears, everything makes me cry. And so there were several moments in Blackjack and The Tale of the Border Knights even that brought those tears to me. And to me, that's the sign of a well-written book that, a lot of times YA books don't give me that depth of emotion that I'm looking for in books. But both Blackjack and The Border Knights gave me, all of the emotions that I'm looking for.
Nice.
In a book, and especially an adventure book.
Can I ask what moment in Blackjack felt that gave you the most concern, or when you were most worried? Is there anything that stands out?
I was most concerned for Jack and his decisions towards the end when his dad came into play.
Okay. So, wow. So the whole Syncardia machine sequence worked for you. Okay.
I mean, I trusted that you would get us to where we needed to go. But then once I got to that moment where his dad came back into play and, his loyalty is being tested, where is he going to go? Is he going to go with his new family, or is he going to go, with his dad? I had no idea where it was going to go. And I was like, what is Jack going to do in this moment? That was the only time, because Jack had, this arsenal of friends and family in Keymark, that until that moment, he would always have someone along to help him for the ride. But at that moment, it was truly his story, for me at least. That was his story, and his, his decision. He decided where that story was going to go.
Yeah.
And it all rode on him. And so that was my moment of, is Jack truly in trouble at this moment?
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, that's part of the fun of the storytelling, is that through the entire first third of the book, Jack is making no decisions. Right. Everything is just foisted on him, and he's reacting. And then we get to the middle part of the book, and he starts to make decisions, and some good ones and some bad ones. And we get the results of all those. And then we get to the shaving scene, and we get to the wolf. And then everything after that is, this is what I am deciding to do, for good or for ill.
Yeah.
And so that makes for a great 3-act structure, because it gives you that helplessness at the beginning, and then the faltering steps in the middle, and then the end where it's like, okay, this is me. This is what I'm doing.
Yeah. So, wrapping up here, I don't want to keep you too long, but this has been super fun. What can you tell us about future writing projects that you have?
So version 1 of the next book got finished last week.
Awesome. Congratulations.
Don't get excited. To me, a V1 is the worst part.
Absolutely.
I outline a little bit, and I'll give myself an act 1, 2, 3, and then I have to start writing to play within that box, because I don't. I might know where I'm going, but I don't really know how I'm going to get there. And sometimes you're writing a scene, and the emotion is going this way, when you thought you were going over here, and you have to follow that, because that's the truth, and that's what's happening. So that's where we're going. And so going through and getting it all on paper, and it's just ugly. Right. It's just this all I have done is created a block of wood. Right. It's like a felled tree at this point.
Absolutely.
And now I get to go in and start doing the fun stuff, which is just.
One of my MFA professors always said that the true magic of writing comes in the editing. The first draft is more just word vomit. You're just getting the words out on the paper. And then the next phase is where you edit it, and you truly chisel down that story that you want to tell in that book.
And I hate the V1. I hate doing it. I hate reading it. I hate looking at it. But the getting that, producing that log is really, it's so nice to have it done, because after that, everything is downhill. Like, even if you have an entire chapter or 2 that don't work, at least you know what doesn't work.
Right.
And you can go, okay, all of this is garbage, so I need to get from here to here. Okay, this person is going this way, so maybe that arc goes the other way than what I originally thought it was going to do.
When I wrote my thesis, I started with a general idea of what I wanted each chapter to be. And then my main advisor is like, this needs to be chapter 1, and this needs to be chapter 2. I think she was like, before we went live, we were talking about how one day I want to turn it into historical fiction piece. And I think that was where she was trying to nudge me, because she wrote both fiction and nonfiction. and she's written historical fiction. And I think it was her second book was a Pulitzer nominee. She's an amazing writer, but she kept asking about that family villain, and she kept trying to get me to get into her head. And so I feel like she was kind of trying to nudge me that way, but I had already declared for a nonfiction emphasis.
Mm-hmm.
And like things were, so laid out in my head that I stubbornly stuck to nonfiction.
The track had been laid.
Right. I'm like, but this is what it is. But I also knew myself, like, history is my second love. Books are my first love. History is my second love. And I knew that if I went down the historical fiction route, that I would get stuck in that research circle.
Yo, yeah. Oh.
And that's what's happened. I don't even have a complete draft.
Mm-hmm.
I had enough to pass my thesis defense,
Mm-hmm.
which was like, I think we needed at least 90 pages. But there's still at least two chapters out there that, like, one of them deals with my family going even further back to Scotland, and there's like another family legend says that we were known supporters of Mary, Queen of Scots, and we were Queensmen, and we fought for Mary, and then when Mary fled to England, after persecution, having to give up the throne to her son, my ancestors then went to England with her, and that's where they settled down from Scotland. And so one chapter was going to deal with all of that, because growing up, my family was all about, we're Irish, we're Irish, we're Irish, but my grandfather was very adamantly saying that we were Scottish, and he was the only one in the family that said we were Scottish. And so that chapter is dealing with, the differences between Irish and Scottish. And, we have this thing in books now written about my ancestor that has our family name says that, we go back here. What's to say that this isn't our family? But then I got stuck. I became fascinated with Mary's story. And I've always been fascinated with the Tudor dynasty, and she was related to the Tudors, and there was the whole battle between Mary and Elizabeth I, and I got stuck in that research mode that I've written that chapter like a gazillion times, but I always get stuck at that same part. Because that's where kind of like the history of it ends, and where I have to switch to like my family. And we just have like this one legend from books that were written about my ancestor that say like our family goes back here, but there's nothing to actually prove that that's our family besides the same name, which is Blakelock. So it could be Scottish, it could be Irish.
Mm-hmm.
But I keep getting stuck at that same part, and I'm just like, so I know way too much about Mary, Queen of Scots.
And not nearly enough about the Blakelocks.
Right. I know there are two brothers named Ralph and Luke. And they were that was the family legend. Before the family legend. Well, this has been super fun.
Oh, good. I'm glad you had a good time.
Definitely.
And thank you very much for having me on for the inaugural. I'm looking forward to
Absolutely.
seeing kind of what each Sunday becomes.
Yeah.
Over the course of the series.
Yeah.
I hope you get the opportunity to continue it. And again, I'll say you have no idea how important reviewers and you doing this are, especially to indie authors.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing wrong with trad. Let's be very clear. These are amazing stories and amazing authors.
Absolutely.
And not all indie authors are producing stuff that really works, but the ones who are desperately need the help that comes along with you and things like this, because you can't buy exposure. You can't create exposure by yourself. There's only so much how you can talk about your own darn work, book.
Right.
So, you doing this, I think, is going to be a big help for a lot of indie authors coming down the pipe.
Yeah.
And
It was funny because um, I interact with a lot of indie authors on Twitter and social media. And last year, I kind of put out feelers to see who would want to join me, and I got like no response. And I was like, okay, maybe, it's not the right time, not the right, mode. Maybe I said the wrong words or something. Maybe my channel's not big enough because I'm not one of the biggest channels. I'm not a big channel. And then I was, my partner, he's always trying to think of ways to grow my channel. And he's like, he loved seeing me have authors on the channel last year. And the year before that, I had Nicholas Eames on.
Yeah.
And he was absolutely fantastic. He's such a great guy. And I love his band series. But he's like, you should have more writers on. And I'm like, okay, but how am I going to get these writers on? So then I put another feeler out on Twitter, and no lie, I got more writers than an entire year doing this once a week will take place.
Oh, yeah.
I'm like, I already want to have, at the beginning of the year, I had scheduled at least one self-pub book a month for me to read. And I'm like, I want to have at least those writers on my channel, if anything. And then I got there's still people that are responding to that one tweet that was now weeks ago. And I'm like, I literally don't have enough time to have you all on.
Right.
I'm like, if I don't get you on this year, you'll have first dibs next year. Because I want to be able to read their books before I talk to them and support them.
And it gives you the opportunity to be selective about talking to the people that resonate with you, because that conversation is going to be so much more useful for everybody else that's watching, because you have an emotional connection with what they wrote. And I think that's really important, because obviously, if you're going to read one self-pub a month, then 6 of them, 8 of them are going to resonate with you, and the rest of them are going to be like, well, okay, it was good, but I don't know that I want to go back and play this game again. And so I think you being able to have a root base of people that are interested, and for you be able to go, okay, I want to talk with her because she had something to say that mattered to me.
Yeah, absolutely. And so next week we'll have Helen Reig Peterson on. Last year she released Waking Ursa Minor, which many of my subscribers have heard me talk about relentlessly, just like Blackjack. And she is this coming week has a new book out in a totally different world, a fantasy romance, which I read and absolutely loved. So next week we'll have her on, and then the week after that we have Jordan Darrett on, the author of The 12 Blades in Contempt, which is another great fantasy book. And then, from there, sky's the limit.
Booked through to February. Apply for March.
I literally have my notebook here. I have pages of author names that people have said that they've I've run out of room. I've had to create a whole notebook for it.
Right? Instead of a TBR, you've got a 2B.
It started on a little sticky note, and then it became 5 sticky notes, and then became a full-size legal pad. And I'm like, you know what? I have these notebooks that aren't being used.
Well, yeah, and it gives you the opportunity to trumpet the things that you are involved in and the things that you like. Because, again, I'm telling you from the self-pub perspective, it's not one review, it's not one mention, it's the cumulative effect of a bunch of different people. And so when you're picking out the people that you really like, you're you're adding on to their pile of people that are talking about them. And once that pile gets big enough, then other people start taking effect, and it gives them the opportunity to tell more stories, because there's nothing, I mean, there's nothing profitable about self-pub. And so, that kind of support is the reason why we keep going. So thank you very much for doing this.
Yeah, well, thank you for creating Keymark and the legends that at least I have grown to love. And I can't wait to see what more you have in store for us.
Me neither. We'll see what it looks like when we whittle it down.
All right, everyone out there, thank you guys for joining us. And like I said, tune in next week for episode 2 of Self Pub Sundays with Helen Reich Peterson. And I hope you all have a fantastic rest to your weekend.
And mahalo.